Well, it's been another insane week of news in our ongoing national crises, plural, whether it's political violence or election denialism or extrajudicial killings in international waters. Pick your flavor. There's a lot going on. I wanted to start, though, today with what happened at the Georgia State Election Board this week, which probably a lot of people missed among that deluge.
I would like to propose a motion to send a letter to the Election Assistance Commission to support the petition recommending a change to the federal voter registration application to require proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. I would like to, under new business, discuss a petition from the rule petition from the board concerning numbered voter lists.
The Open Meetings Act requires circulation of an agenda in advance of a meeting so that the public is made aware.
I recognize that I'm one voice and this is simply me speaking out, but I wanted that to be included in the record. I believe that this violates at least the spirit, if not the letter of the Open Meetings Act.
For those of you who don't know, the Georgia State Election Board has had its fair share of controversy in the last few years, especially last year, as 3 pro-Trump members on the board, who are all hardcore election deniers, were introducing all sorts of last-minute rules and regulations that essentially would have helped Trump and Republicans carry out specious investigations into very questionable claims of voter fraud, but also just made it more difficult to vote, because that's the end game here. Whether it's doing away with voting machines or mail-in ballots or overseas and military ballots, Republicans want to make it harder for you to vote. What the Georgia State Election Board this week was essentially carry on that mission. But another thing that they did was they heard and discussed cases that have been submitted by Georgians alleging instances of election fraud. One of the cases they talked about, I think, is pretty instructive because it details the insane things that so many of our fellow Americans believe about elections. And it deals with a woman who went into a polling location in November to vote in the presidential election. And she was so wound up about all of the lies and misinformation about the efficacy and safety of voting machines that she refused to vote on one. So she demanded a provisional ballot. The poll workers gave her a provisional ballot and then gave her a pen to fill it out. She refused to use the pen, too, because she thought it would have disappearing ink. Here's an investigator from the Secretary of State's office.
Ms. Janet, the poll manager, assisted Ms. Kaplan in her request to complete a provisional ballot. At some point, the poll manager contacted the election director to advise on the situation. Ms. Kaplan was provided a provisional ballot but refused to use the emergency ballot pen. She believed the pen had disappearing ink in it. Kaplan had her phone on and her phone camera on. She was asked to turn her phone off and advised of the law, but Kaplan refused. The poll manager witnessed her take a picture of her completed provisional ballot. Kaplan denied taking a photo and mentioned Sharpiegate in her distrust of the elections.
Now, in this same meeting, these election deniers on the board, of course, continued their work spreading misinformation and questioning things like voting machines, because that's just what they do. But when confronted with the results of spreading that misinformation and those lies about the safety of our elections, they didn't have anything to say, because this is what they have wrought. They have wrought the insanity of everyday Americans walking into a polling location and thinking a pen has fucking disappearing ink in it. Part of this is, of course, because people like Dr. Janice Johnston and the other Trump-supporting members of the election board are hyper online. And when I say online, I mean probably Facebook. So they're being inundated with all of these really questionable claims and outright false claims of voter fraud, and their minds have just kind of gotten warped in a way that they're not really coming back from. And they share that with a lot of other Americans. A lot of those Americans are currently members of our federal government and working in the White House and places like the FBI. One of them is Kash Patel, who's the director of the FBI. In the wake of a fatal shooting at a Dallas ICE facility this week, Patel went on X, like he always does, because he thinks it's his job to post, and he shared a photo of unspent shell casings that the shooter allegedly used, where anti-ICE was written on one of them. Now, let me just point out how unprecedented and insane it is for a law enforcement official as high-ranking as the director of the FBI to be sharing evidence in an ongoing criminal case. That's nuts in and of itself. But potentially more troubling is that Patel and others are selectively releasing evidence. Why are they doing that? Because they want to perpetuate a narrative that left-wing extremist violence is out of control in this country. I'll get to why they want to do that in a second, but let's go back to the shell casings first. Because at a press conference the day after the shooting, local FBI officials were asked, hey, there was this writing on the unspent shell casings. Was there any writing on any of the bullets that were actually fired in the attack? Here's FBI Special Agent in Charge Joseph Rothrock not answering that question.
In a review of the Dallas Observer, you mentioned the one bullet that was found with kind of ideological writing on it. Have any of the bullets found around the scene had any writing on them, or is it just the one?
Again, active crime scene. We're still collecting physical evidence.
The reason this is noteworthy, other than that it's total bullshit compared with the fact that Kash Patel was releasing evidence in this very same ongoing investigation the day before. The reason it's noteworthy is because other evidence in this case could point to different motivations than that being espoused by the Trump administration and Kash Patel and the FBI and officials like Rothrock. By all appearances, the Dallas shooter had some fairly complicated politics when he had political leanings at all. His friends told Ken Klippenstein that he didn't really have political leanings, and if he did, they were somewhat libertarian. One friend did tell NBC News that the shooter had been fired up about fear-mongering related to migrant caravans. There's not really a whole lot that alludes to a super left-wing agenda here. All of this stuff is an aside to the perpetuation of the narrative that the White House would like to put out there, which is that they tried to kill Trump, they killed Charlie Kirk, they're trying to kill ICE agents, and so therefore we got to go after them. To that end, Trump signed an executive order this week that directs multiple agencies within the federal government to start investigating left-wing groups. Of course, this is going to result in violation of Americans' constitutional rights who have nothing to do with political violence. These claims that the American left is responsible for a lot of acts of recent political violence are, number one, just factually incorrect. But number two, like the indictment against former FBI Director James Comey, this narrative of out-of-control left-wing extremism is being used to instill fear into the hearts of Americans who disagree with the Trump administration. Put simply, this is to silence dissent, to make people scared, to speak their minds, to protest, because protest and riots are also considered something that's tied to political violence and that somebody could be prosecuted by the Justice Department for, and which you'd be scared to post things about how maybe Charlie Kirk was actually a hateful person. Not that he deserved what happened to him, but he was kind of a bigot. Basically, they want you to be scared to speak your mind. They want you to be scared to donate to Democratic politicians so that they can get reelected, which threatens their power. They want you to be scared to be associated with groups like the ACLU, because the ACLU regularly sues the Trump administration in court and threatens their power. Meanwhile, the attack on the ICE facility in Dallas is being used not just to perpetuate this narrative of out-of-control left-wing violence, but also as a cudgel to call for people to stop criticizing ICE. Republicans like Ted Cruz are really fired up about this. You can't criticize ICE because look what happens. You can't call ICE things like the Gestapo and Nazis and secret police. This is what Republicans are saying. Meanwhile, ICE is doing things like this. That was at a courthouse in New York. The officer involved has incredibly actually faced some punishment from the Trump administration, has been suspended by DHS. But in a lot of other cases of ICE agents roughing people up, whether they're protesters or immigrants, there's been no accountability. Also this week, here's an ICE officer in Maryland. That's him and his partner unable to get whoever that guy is on the ground under control. And then the one guy trying to put his gun in his belt, dropping it, losing a magazine. and then realizing either how out of control the situation is getting or how stupid he looks, starts pointing the gun at citizens on the street who are filming the interaction. So when people like Ted Cruz say, we don't understand why people are calling ICE secret police and the Gestapo, it's because of shit like that. To bring it back to Georgia, this idea that anyone who criticizes the Trump administration or ICE or Republicans is fomenting political violence has spread downward from the White House. In Fulton County, where Atlanta is, Republicans are trying to get 2 hardcore election deniers seated on the Fulton County Election Board. That way they can dig up information that they think is going to prove their insane claims of election fraud in 2020. They're still investigating 2020. One of them has explicitly said that he looks forward to working with Trump's Justice Department to investigate 2020 fraud. But in the process of trying to get these 2 election deniers on the election board, the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, which has a majority of Democrats, has said, no, we're not seating these guys. So the Republicans have sued. The county commission appealed. That decision is pending in state court. In the meantime, a Fulton County commissioner who's a Democrat filed an ethics complaint against a Republican on the board. That Republican is, of course, an avowed election denier by the name of Bridget Thorne. During one of the meetings over this debacle about putting these 2 completely unqualified election deniers on the election board, Bridget Thorne basically said, well, you don't have to worry about it because if they do anything wrong, I'll tell them to act right. The Democrat who filed the ethics complaint says this is a violation of the county's ethics rules because Thorne shouldn't be able to tell any official other than herself what to do and what decisions to make. In response, Thorne took to her Instagram page and she posted this picture of the Democratic commissioner who filed the ethics complaint with the caption, "Political attacks lead to political violence." I reached out to Thorne and asked her about this, and she, of course, said something along the lines of, that's not what I actually said. I wasn't saying that the Democratic commissioner's ethics complaint would lead to political violence. I'll put the email up here because she always accuses me of not providing her full statement in my reporting. But to be clear, this is exactly what Bridget Thorne said. And it's along the lines of what a lot of other Republicans are saying, that any dissent, any criticism, anything you say that isn't in lockstep with what they think the country should look like is akin to an act of political violence, and they are going to come after you for it. That's where we're at. See you next time.